Good morning, children. In my last video, I discussed about the bones, the skeletal system, which is the framework of our body, the human skull, and the backbone. Today, we'll be studying about rib cage. Now, children, there are 24 ribs in our body, 12 on each side. That means 12 pairs of ribs. So you can see the picture of a rib cage. Now it forms a cage, that is why it is called a rib cage. Now ribs are thin and flat curved bones that forms a cage around our heart and lungs to protect them. So the rib cage protects our heart and lungs. There are 12 pairs of ribs and these ribs join the backbone at the back. So at the back of the rib is the vertebral column, and in the front the rib cage joins the sternum or the breastbone. Now two pairs of lower ribs are not attached to the sternum, and these two ribs are called the floating ribs. Now you can see in the picture these the last two pair of ribs are not joined to the sternum, and these ribs are called the floating ribs. Now we move on to the limbs. The forelimbs. The forelimbs, the bone of the shoulder, are attached to our vertebral column with the help of shoulder girdle or the pectoral girdle. Now the forelimb is the limb of our arms. The forelimb is divided into three parts: the upper arm, the forearm, and the hand. The upper arm is a single long bone called humerus. Now you can see humerus is divided into three parts: head, shaft, and trachea. Now the upper arm is called the humerus, and it provides strength for pulling and lifting. The upper arm contains a single bone. The humerus is attached to our vertebral column through collarbone and shoulder blade. The wrist and hand have 27 bones, and the lower arm has two long bones. Now we move on to the hind limbs. The hind limbs means our legs. The hind limbs or legs are flat bones which are attached to the backbone, which forms the pelvic girdle. Bones of the lower limbs are attached to the hip bone. Upper half of the legs have long bone called femur or the thigh bone. It is the longest bone in our body. The lower leg has two bones, namely tibia and fibula. The ankle and foot are made up of 26 small bones. So you can see the diagram. It is fibula, the longest bone, femur is there, and tibia is there. Now we move on to joints. So what are joints actually? Joints are places where two bones meet or where two bones are joined together. Joints help the bones of the skeletal system move. These bones are held together by long stretchy bands called ligaments. So between two bones there are ligaments. There are many joints in the body. Different joints allow different types of movement. Only the bones of the skull don't allow movement. The bones in the skull, except for the lower jawbone, the bones of the skull do not allow any movement. The joint between the ribs and breastbone allows slight movement. Most of the ribs in the human body are freely movable. There are four types of freely movable joints. Now we will discuss these joints one by one. The first is the hinge joint. The hinge joint works like a door on a hinge. It is a very long joint. It allows back and forth movement. It enables movement only in one direction. Hinge joint is found in our knees and elbows. Now we move on to ball and socket joint. Here, one bone's end is rounded like a ball and it fits into hollow socket of another bone's end. Now this kind of joint, that is the ball and socket joint, it allows maximum movement. If you see a bowler bowling, you will see that he swings both his arms to throw the ball. Now this is possible only because of ball and socket joint, which is allowing maximum movement. Now this type of joint is found in our hip and shoulder. Now we move on to pivot joint. In pivot joint, one bone has a projection which fits into the ring-like ligament of another bone. It allows movement in many ways. It allows movement from right to left, up and down, back movement, front movement. And this kind of joint is found between skull and neck. So you can move your skull, that means you can move your head in any direction, sideways, up and down. You can just try and see. Now we move on to gliding joint. In gliding joint, the adjacent bones can slide over each other. It allows our back to bend, twist and turn. It also allows side to side motion and forward and backward movement. This type of joint is found in our wrist and ankle. Now we move on to immovable joints. An immovable joint is a place where two bones are joined together, where little or no movement happens. I have discussed earlier also the bones of our skull, the joints between the teeth. These are immovable joints. So, this is the end of our video. In the next class, I'll be discussing about the muscular system. Thank you so much.